Are you yielding? Okay. I recognize Mr. Ginta for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, for 10 minutes for the purpose of opposing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a few concerns that I have with the Senate version of the transportation bill, and there's three main points. Number one, there's a cost associated with it for $109 billion that is not fully paid for, and the nexus for that that dollar amount is increased taxes. Secondly, it's a short-term bill. It's a 2-year bill. I've heard colleagues from the other side of the aisle talk about having a longer-term bill, something that we have worked out on the House side. And then finally, there's no real true long-term reform in this highway bill on the Senate side. So there are significant concerns with this piece of legislation. I think we all share the goal of having a highway bill. It's, in my view, an important component of our constitutional requirements, as well as the need to ensure that we take care and maintain our infrastructure around the country. But I think what we have tried to accomplish in the House is far more effective and achieves the objectives of having a long-term bill, having it paid for, as well as bringing true reform. And I would also add that there were 22 minority amendments accepted in this version of the bill. I would argue that's a substantial bipartisan bill that was adopted in the House bill that was marked up. So I would request that members oppose this amendment and continue to allow the House to do its work and bring forward a longer-term bill that is self-sustaining and has the kinds of reforms that many of us were sent here to address in the first place. And I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett.
I thank the gentleman. I will abide by your request that I, too, will oppose this bill. You know, the Highway Trust Fund has been around for a long time, over 5 decades now. Since it began originally, the money that we spent on the highways was tied to one thing, to the gasoline tax, and it was supposed to be an even ratio there. Money comes in, money goes out, which are on an equal level. That has changed with this amendment. That has changed over the last several years. Actually, the Highway Trust Fund has had to be bailed out almost 3 times since 2008 in the tune of $35 billion and a general fund transfer of $27.5 billion in the Recovery Act. And despite all those infusions of extra money coming in besides the gas tax, what has occurred? It's now basically facing bankruptcy here in 2013. The direction that you're going in this amendment is the wrong direction. To add more money into the system and keep the federal government adding on the mandates to it as well is not the direction this country should go in. You know, the gentlelady from Florida was saying, well, she doesn't trust her own governor to handle the last issue. Well, I wonder whether members around the dais here trust the citizens of their own states to make these decisions when it comes to transportation and to basically to get Washington out of the way. You know, to the gentlelady sponsor of this legislation over in California, you have Transportation Director Malcolm Dougherty. Do you trust him to be able to make these decisions, or does he have to really come to us in Washington to help him make these decisions? Back at home in Culver City, in your home neck of the woods, Transportation Director Art Ida. Do you trust Art Ida to make these decisions? Or again, do we need to be pumping more money and additional regulations and mandates here on the federal level to make these decisions? I'll tell you where I stand. I trust our governors. I trust our transportation secretaries. I trust the county engineers who have to make these tough decisions. I trust the people who actually have to drive on these roads every day far more than any bureaucrat down here in Washington who never knows the back road, Route 517 or 565 or Route 23. They know what needs to be done on those roads, not some bureaucrat that probably the sponsor of this bill can't even name. I trust the people back in my district to make the right decisions. We should not be going this direction. We should allow these decisions to be made back at home and the funding level to be back at home. And for that reason, I concur with the opposition to this amendment and yield back.
Now I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Ginta. I might be willing to accept this amendment if the Senate will agree to accept whatever we pass. They'll also just take in total. And they'll pass as well, since we have a jobs bill that we, in a very wide bipartisan manner, passed just a few weeks ago that is still languishing in the Senate as they discuss it to death. Here's the challenge that we have on this, and it has gone on for a long time in the transportation area. When the gentlelady from California, when we arrived in January of 2011, We were on the 19th FAA extension at that time. We were on the 7th extension on the highway bill at that time. We're now approaching 9, and I understand word today that a 3-month extension is being proposed in the House to get us through this bump as well. So this is not an uncommon problem that has been dealt with when Democrats ran the House and the Senate both, and then now when Republicans have the House and Democrats have the Senate. So we have to get a chance to work through this. That's part of the loud noise of democracy, that we get a chance to work through this. The House version of the bill, though, when it comes out and we go to conference, does bring significant reforms and efficiency and speeds up the process of construction. And I think that's a very important piece. Contrary, and I know the comment was made about the House version actually runs us down to 0. Actually, the Senate version is the one that runs us down to 0 in the Highway Trust Fund. It spends all of it down and assumes there'll be a large flush of money 2 years from now. They're going to come in and replace that. That is quite a gamble to run us all the way down to 0 in the Highway Trust Fund. I don't think it's a wise thing to do. House version, obviously no earmarks, we talked about before, but the key thing is it puts more control in the states. Ray LaHood hates this bill because it takes power from Ray LaHood, and it puts it back in the hands of the states. So I can understand why he deeply hates this bill, because it removes a lot of authority from his office and sends it back to the states and says they need to be able to make these decisions in a local manner. Oklahoma does not need a special designation for covered historic bridges. We happen not to have any. So we don't need a special designation set aside for that. We do need the flexibility to say we need to be able to spend those dollars in other areas that we choose in our state for the wisest investment that we see there. That's what the House version of the bill does. And so we need to see this, to work it through the loud noise of democracy that is happening in the House, finish it, go to conference, and let's work through to get this thing settled on it. With that, I yield back.
And I would close by saying the Senate bill, unfortunately, outpaces the revenue to the trust fund rather quickly in the first couple of years of this piece of legislation. One of the things we need to do is shore up the trust fund, find a way to do that that's responsible. And my reasoning for saying that is when you look at the years from 1999 to 2008, by about $1 billion a year, we had been outspending outlays over receipts. So there is some history here to suggest that this has not been managed well in the past. We need to change that, reform it, and that's what the House bill aims to do. And I hope that we can find a reasonable solution on the House side to get the House version passed. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute for the purposes of closing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For a minute, I actually thought I was getting ready to hear some good news from Mr. Ginta. I thought he was telling me that the House was going to have a long-term bill, and then I was a little confused when my other colleague said that it's actually a short-term bill. So I guess that I have to say that my colleagues in the majority are still a little confused about what is going to come forward, so I'll remain optimistic. And as my colleague, Mr. Garrett, who seems to know my district very well, should know that my constituents in Culver City and other areas strongly were in favor of this amendment and definitely called me and said, do what I can to make sure that the transportation bill moves forward. I think it's time for us to act. When we look at the construction industry, and in some areas, construction workers have 40% unemployment. It is time for the House to put people back to work, invest in road, rail, transit, and I would ask my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Time, gentlelady, has expired. The question is on the green to the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
No. It being the chair, the noes have it. Okay. Roll call vote is requested, and the clerk will